They told you the gold standard kept governments honest. They told you it prevented inflation. They told you abandoning it in 1971 was the beginning of our economic problems. Every single part of that story is a lie. And the real story, the one they never taught you, reveals something far more disturbing about money, power, and the system we live in today. Because here's what actually happened. The gold standard didn't constrain governments. It bankrupted them. It didn't prevent inflation. It caused deflation so severe that farmers burned their crops and workers starved in the streets. And abandoning it in 1971? That wasn't the beginning of our problems. It was the inevitable endpoint of a pattern that had been repeating for over 2,000 years. This is the story of the greatest monetary lie ever told. And once you see it, you'll never look at money the same way again. Let's go back to where this starts. Ancient Lydia, 600 BC, King Croesus minted the world's first standardized gold coins. The story we've been told is simple. Gold became money because it was rare, durable, divisible, a natural choice, a neutral arbiter of value. But that's not why gold became money. Gold became money because kings could control it. You can't control cattle. You can't control grain. These things reproduce, spoil, scatter across 1,000 farms. But gold comes from mines. And mines can be seized, taxed, regulated, monopolized. The moment gold became money, it became a tool of centralized power. Look at what happened next. The Roman Empire runs on gold and silver coins for 6 centuries. The aureus, a gold coin containing about 7 grams of pure gold, becomes the standard of value across the Mediterranean world. Merchants from Britannia to Egypt price everything in aurea. It's stable, it's trusted, it works. Until it doesn't. Emperor Nero faces a problem. Year 64 AD, Rome is burning. Rebuilding costs are astronomical. Military campaigns in Britannia and Judea are bleeding the treasury dry. The Senate won't raise taxes, the people are already restless. So Nero does something clever. Something that will be repeated by every government for the next 2,000 years. He reduces the gold content in the aureus from 7.3 grams to 7.2 grams. Just 1.4%. Nobody notices. The coins still look the same. Still feel the same. Still say aureus on them. But now, with the same amount of gold, Nero can mint 1.4% more coins. Free money. Problem solved. Except the problem isn't solved. It's just beginning. Because once that door opens, it never closes. The next emperor reduces gold content to 7 grams, then 6.5, then 6. By the time Diocletian takes power in 284 AD, the aureus contains barely 5 grams of gold. In 3 centuries, the Roman government has stolen 30% of the money supply through debasement. Prices have exploded. The empire's collapsing. And here's the critical insight. This happened under a gold standard. Gold didn't prevent debasement. It didn't keep the government honest. It just slowed them down slightly. The pattern was already forming. Fast forward to 17th century Europe, goldsmiths have become informal bankers. Merchants deposit gold with them for safekeeping. In return, they receive paper receipts. These receipts are easier to carry than gold coins. They're transferable. Soon, people are trading the receipts instead of claiming the actual gold. The goldsmiths notice something interesting. Most gold just sits in their vaults. People trade the paper receipts, but they rarely come to withdraw the actual metal. So the goldsmiths start issuing more receipts than they have gold. If they hold 100 ounces of gold, they might issue receipts for 150 ounces. As long as everyone doesn't demand their gold at once, nobody knows. This is the birth of fractional reserve banking, and it's built on a mathematical impossibility. More claims to gold than gold actually exists. The system works perfectly until the moment it doesn't. Until everyone wants their gold at the same time. That moment has a name, a bank run, and it will define the next 300 years of monetary history. By the 1800s, this system has gone international. The British pound, the French franc, the American dollar all are paper currencies backed by gold. Redeemable in gold on demand, the notes promise. But here's what they don't tell you. The banks issuing these notes hold maybe 20 to 40% of the gold needed to honor all claims. The other 60 to 80% doesn't exist. It's phantom gold. Claims without metal. The gold standard, as it actually functioned, wasn't gold. It was faith. Faith that most people wouldn't demand redemption at once. Faith that the bank would stay solvent. Faith that the government wouldn't seize the gold. And the moment that faith broke in panic, in war, in crisis, the gold standard evaporated like morning fog. August 1914, Archduke Ferdinand is assassinated in Sarajevo. Within weeks, Europe is at war. And within days of war being declared, every major nation does the same thing. They suspend gold convertibility. Britain suspends it. France suspends it. Germany suspends it. Russia suspends it. The gold standard, the foundation of the global monetary system, the constraint on government power, the guarantor of sound money is abandoned in a matter of days. Not because of careful economic planning, not after lengthy debate, but because the moment war arrived, governments needed one thing above all else: the ability to print unlimited money. Here's what they discovered. You can't fight a modern industrial war on a gold standard. The costs are too high. The resources required too vast. Gold-backed money meant governments could only spend what they could tax or borrow, but modern warfare demanded spending on a scale no tax base could support. So the gold standard had to go. What happened next reveals the entire lie. These suspensions were supposed to be temporary. For the duration of the war, they promised, but Britain didn't return to gold until 1925, 7 years after the war ended. France waited until 1928. Germany's gold standard was destroyed by hyperinflation. Russia's evaporated with the Bolshevik Revolution. The temporary suspension became permanent for millions of people. And when they did try to return to gold, it was catastrophic. Britain returns to the gold standard in 1925 at the pre-war exchange rate, $4.86 per pound. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Winston Churchill, makes the announcement with great fanfare. Britain is returning to sound money, to discipline, to the tried and true system that made Britain great. Within a year, the British economy is in crisis. Here's why. During the war, Britain printed massive amounts of pounds to pay for ships, ammunition, soldiers, supplies. The money supply expanded dramatically. Prices rose. When Britain returned to gold at the old exchange rate, they were pretending all that wartime inflation never happened. They were trying to stuff a balloon back into its original packaging. The result was predictable and brutal. British exports became unaffordable on global markets. Coal mines shut down. Steel mills went dark. Unemployment exploded. Workers saw their wages cut 10%, 20%, 30%. And because Britain was on the gold standard, the government couldn't print money to stimulate the economy. The gold standard demanded deflation, demanded wage cuts, demanded economic contraction. In May 1926, British workers had enough. The general strike, over 1.7 million workers walking off the job simultaneously. Miners, railway workers, steel workers, dock workers. The economy ground to a halt, not because of inflation or excessive government spending, but because the gold standard required crushing deflation to maintain the exchange rate. This same pattern repeated across Europe. France struggled. Germany collapsed into hyperinflation after trying to pay war reparations in gold. The gold standard, which was supposed to bring stability, had brought economic warfare instead. And then came 1929. The stock market crashes in October 1929. Banks start failing. Depositors panic and rush to withdraw their money. But remember, these banks are on a fractional reserve system. They've loaned out far more than they actually have. When everyone demands their money at once, the entire system seizes up. Here's where the gold standard becomes a death trap. Countries on the gold standard can't print money to stop the panic. They can't lower interest rates to stimulate borrowing. They can't inject liquidity into failing banks. Why? Because every dollar, every pound, every franc is supposed to be backed by gold. Expanding the money supply means either acquiring more gold or breaking the gold standard. Most countries don't have more gold, so they have exactly two choices: watch their economy collapse or abandon gold. Between 1929 and 1933, industrial production in the United States falls by 46%. Unemployment hits 25%. Banks fail by the thousands. Life savings evaporate overnight. Families lose their homes, their farms, everything. And the Federal Reserve, constrained by gold standard rules, does nothing. Can't do anything. The gold standard demands deflation, and deflation is what America gets. Then, in 1933, Franklin Roosevelt does something unprecedented. He makes private gold ownership illegal. Every American is ordered to turn in their gold to the government at $20.67 per ounce. Then, once the government has collected the gold, Roosevelt revalues it to $35 per ounce, a 41% overnight devaluation. Think about what just happened. The government forced citizens to sell their gold at one price, then immediately declared that gold was worth 41% more. The government stole 41% of the value of every gold coin in America, and they did it while claiming to support sound money and the gold standard. The gold standard didn't protect Americans from government theft, it was the mechanism of the theft. World War II ends. The global monetary system is in shambles. Currencies are worthless paper. International trade has collapsed. In July 1944, representatives from 44 nations meet at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to create a new system. Here's what they design. The US dollar becomes the world's reserve currency, backed by gold at $35 per ounce. Other currencies are pegged to the dollar. The dollar is as good as gold. This is supposed to be the gold standard 2.0, all the benefits of gold, but with the flexibility of paper money. But there's a fatal flaw built into the system from day one. The United States promises to redeem dollars for gold at $35 per ounce, but there's no mechanism to ensure the US doesn't print more dollars than it has gold to back them. And that's exactly what happens. The 1960s arrive. The Vietnam War is escalating. The Great Society programs are expanding. The US government is spending money far faster than its tax revenue can support, so it prints dollars, billions of them. The money supply explodes, but the gold in Fort Knox doesn't increase. The math is simple and terrifying. The United States has promised to redeem dollars for gold at $35 per ounce. Foreign governments are holding tens of billions of dollars, but the U.S. gold reserve has shrunk to just over $10 billion worth of gold. There are 3 times more dollar claims than gold to back them. France, under Charles de Gaulle, figures this out. Starting in 1965, France begins demanding gold for its dollars. Other countries follow. By 1971, gold is hemorrhaging out of Fort Knox. The game is up. August 15, 1971. Sunday evening, President Richard Nixon appears on television for a special announcement. In a 9-minute address, he announces that the United States is temporarily suspending the convertibility of dollars into gold. Temporarily. That's what he says. 54 years later, that temporary suspension is still in effect. Here's what Nixon is really saying. The promises we made at Bretton Woods, we're breaking them. The gold backing the dollar. It doesn't exist. The system we told you was sound, stable, and honest. It was all a lie. But here's the part nobody talks about. Nixon didn't have a choice. The gold standard had already failed. It failed the moment the U.S. printed more dollars than it had gold. It failed the moment fractional reserve banking created money out of thin air. It failed the moment governments realized they could debase currency and most people wouldn't notice. The gold standard was never an anchor. It was always a suggestion, a gentleman's agreement. A promise that could be broken the moment keeping it became inconvenient. And in every crisis, every war, every panic, every depression, governments broke that promise. Here's the lie at the center of everything. The gold standard was never about limiting government power. It was about concentrating it. Think about what a gold standard requires. A centralized authority to mint coins, a government to enforce legal tender laws, a central bank to manage gold reserves, a military to secure gold mines and shipments, regulations to prevent counterfeiting and fraud. The gold standard didn't limit government, it required extensive government power to function at all. And here's the deeper paradox. The countries that stayed on the gold standard the longest suffered the most during the Depression. Britain, France, the United States, they experienced deeper deflation, higher unemployment, longer recoveries than countries that abandoned gold early. The gold standard didn't protect these economies, it strangled them. Meanwhile, countries that left gold early, like Sweden in 1931, or Japan in 1917, recovered faster. Their economies grew, their unemployment fell. The constraint wasn't keeping them stable, it was keeping them poor. The gold standard, in practice, was never what its supporters claimed. It didn't prevent inflation, governments just debased coins instead. It didn't prevent bank failures, fractional reserve banking guaranteed periodic panics. It didn't prevent excessive government spending, wars were fought, debts were accumulated, and when the bills came due, the gold standard was simply suspended. What the gold standard actually did was create deflation. And deflation is economic poison. When prices fall, people defer purchases, waiting for even lower prices. When people stop buying, businesses cut production. When production falls, workers lose jobs. When workers lose jobs, they can't buy anything, so prices fall further. It's a death spiral. The gold standard created that spiral over and over again. 1873 to 1896 in the United States, the 1920s in Britain, the 1930s globally. Every time, the prescription was the same. Maintain the gold standard. Let prices fall, let wages fall, let unemployment rise. The economy will naturally adjust. Except the adjustment meant families starving, farms foreclosed, lives destroyed. Since 1971, the world has operated on pure fiat currency. No gold backing, no commodity anchor, just paper war, more accurately. Digital entries and computer systems declared to be money by government decree. And here's what happened. The period from 1971 to today has seen the longest stretch of economic growth in human history. No global depressions, no bank panics. That last year's, yes, there have been recessions. 1973, 1980, 1990, 2001, 2008, 2020. But each one was met with aggressive central bank action. Interest rates were cut. Money was printed. Governments ran deficits. Stimulus was deployed. Could they have done that on a gold standard? Absolutely not. The 2008 financial crisis would have been the second Great Depression. The 2020 pandemic would have caused economic devastation beyond measure. But central banks printed trillions of dollars, euros, yen, pounds. They broke every rule of the gold standard, and the economy survived. Then, this is critical. Surviving isn't the same as thriving. Since 1971, wealth inequality has exploded. Asset prices have detached from economic fundamentals. Housing is unaffordable. Stocks trade at valuations that make no historical sense. Debt, government debt, corporate debt, household debt has grown exponentially. Why? Because in a pure fiat system, money flows to wherever it's created first. Central banks create money and inject it into financial markets. Banks, hedge funds, corporations get access to that newly created money before prices rise. By the time that money reaches ordinary workers through wages, prices have already adjusted. The people closest to the money printer get rich. Everyone else gets inflation. This is called the Cantillon effect. named after 18th century economist Richard Cantillon, and it's the dirty secret of fiat currency. The gold standard didn't prevent this. Governments just used different mechanisms to debase currency, but fiat money makes it easier, faster, more invisible. Here's the pattern that repeats across every monetary system. Gold-backed or not, the people who control money creation become the most powerful force in society. In the gold standard era, that meant the people who controlled gold mines, gold reserves, and banking systems. In the fiat era, it means the people who control central banks, financial regulations, and access to credit. The system changes. The mechanism changes. But the outcome is always the same. Money flows upward, power concentrates, the wealthy get wealthier, the powerful get more powerful, and the majority of the people who trade their labor for currency fall further behind. The gold standard didn't prevent this, it just did it through deflation instead of inflation. It crushed debtors instead of savers. It bankrupted farmers instead of retirees. Different victims, same pattern. So where does this leave us? We can't go back to the gold standard. That system failed repeatedly for 2,000 years. But we also can't ignore the structural problems of fiat currency, the incentive to print endlessly, the wealth inequality it creates, the debt it incurred. Some people say cryptocurrency is the answer, digital gold standard, that governments can't control. But cryptocurrencies have their own problems: volatility, scalability, energy consumption, and the fundamental fact that any currency needs widespread acceptance to function. Most cryptocurrencies are speculation vehicles, not actual money. Others say central bank digital currencies are the future government-issued digital dollars, euros, or yuan, but this just concentrates monetary control even further. Instead of commercial banks creating money through lending, the central bank would control every transaction directly. Total financial surveillance, total government control. The truth is, there's no perfect monetary system. Gold wasn't perfect, fiat isn't perfect, digital won't be perfect. Every system creates winners and losers. Every system concentrates power somewhere. Every system can be manipulated by those in control. What matters is understanding the pattern. Understanding that the gold standard wasn't what you were told it was, that it didn't prevent government excess, it just made the consequences different. That money, in any form, is ultimately about power. About who has it, who controls it, who benefits from it. And right now, in 2024, we're living through the endgame of the fiat experiment. Debt levels are unsustainable. Central banks are trapped between inflation and recession. Governments are spending far beyond their means. The wealth gap is wider than it's been since the 1920s. The gold standard failed because it couldn't accommodate economic growth without causing deflation. Fiat currency is failing because it accommodates economic growth by creating unsustainable debt. Different failure mode. Same inevitable endpoint. The pattern has repeated for 2,000 years. Empires rise on sound money. They grow on credit expansion. They collapse on monetary debasement. Rome did it. Spain did it. Britain did it, and America is doing it right now. The gold standard was a lie, but so is every monetary system. They all promise stability, prosperity, and fairness. They all deliver concentration of power and eventual collapse. The only question is timing, and for our current system, the clock is ticking. This is the story they don't teach you in economics classes. The story of how monetary systems, no matter what they're based on, inevitably concentrate power and eventually fail. The gold standard didn't keep governments honest. It just limited how fast they could destroy the currency, and when that limit became inconvenient, they abandoned gold without hesitation. Understanding this doesn't give you a solution, but it does give you clarity. The next time someone tells you we need to return to the gold standard, you'll know the truth. We tried that for 2,000 years. It failed over and over again, and it will fail again if we try it once more. The question isn't gold versus fiat. The question is, who controls money creation, who benefits from it, and what happens to everyone else? Until we answer that question honestly, the pattern will continue, the system will change, but the outcome will remain the same. If this opened your eyes to the truth about money and power, subscribe for more hidden patterns of history. Because once you see them, you can't unsee them, and the next collapse is already forming.